Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Conceptualism. Today, I'm very pleased to have with us today Richard Burrows, who is a percussionist par extraordinaire and runs a festival and composes and is a bit of a renaissance man in the percussion world, if I may say so.
Well, thank you very much.
So, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have a chance to have a conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess I want to start with a question that's always sort of beguiled me, which is, what's the limit on the number of mallets, one a percussionist could conceivably play with? Like, could you, for example, play with 10 mallets, five mallets per hand? Is that possible? Is there any repertoire that calls for some, that kind of technique?
Yeah, fascinating. At first, I thought you were asking about the amount of mallets that I would own, in which case there is no limit to the amount of mallets that I can own.
Oh, trust me, I know that. My mother's always getting upset at me. She's like, how many pairs of drumsticks? How many pairs of of mallets? How many pairs of cymbals? Or collect. Like, how big is your collection? I said, Mom, I don't ask myself those questions because I don't want to know the answers. So please don't ask me.
That's right. That's right. In terms of the how many you can hold in a hand, typically we use four, as two per hand is kind of
Mhm.
the most common. And I think that there are, in certain circumstances, there are, some opportunities to have three.
Yeah.
There is one percussionist who, his name is Ludwig Albert.
Mm.
He uses eight, so four in each hand.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in my opinion, though, he's probably one of the only people who does this.
Mm.
And so to me, that indicates a bit of a limited, it's limited in its usage.
Mm.
And it's more of a trick, I think, in the sense of,
Mm-hmm.
he has some facilitation on the instrument.
Mm.
But again, I personally feel that the mallet instruments themselves, you have more expressive qualities and you have more opportunity to create chordal colors if you have just two mallets in your hand, because you can actually move things a lot quicker. Now he might challenge me on that and say that he could move things quicker, but I think the actual evolution of the technique speaks for itself,
Mm.
right? I mean, if eight was a very easy thing to do and was allowed for more color interpretation,
Mm.
then I think we would see way more of that happening.
Right.
Um,
Right. It
when
would
I
be
was
more
in
widely adopted. But
exactly
it's interesting because when you bring up something like that, when you look at, for example, the evolution of language over time, it seems that when people adopt, for example, a new word or a new expression or a new turn of phrase, there's kind of a time lag before it gets accepted into the lexicon or into the vocabulary, or even into the dictionary for that matter. So for I'm just thinking about this in terms of pure human evolution. For example, in 100 years, people's hands may, for example, be more capable of holding four mallets or less capable. So I think maybe there's also like, for example, Oscar Peterson could play, I think it was a 13th or a 14th with his hand easily. Now if you ask a pianist with smaller hands to do the same thing, that would make absolutely no sense. So maybe his body actually can accommodate that technique, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, while it's not widely adopted, a composer may, for example, wish to, maybe even you might wish to say, okay, well, what's the very limit of what's the ontological limit of what I can do with the tools at hand? So yeah, so
Absolutely. I totally agree. And as you are aware, that the evolution of percussion has been booming in the
mm,
past, 2, 3 decades. This
yes,
really is the era of percussion. You know, just
yes,
a simple, even just the range of the instruments
mm,
has changed dramatically in the past 3 decades.
Yes.
You know, back in the 80s, 5-octave marimbas were not a very common thing.
Mm,
And so I mean, they did exist, but you know, only the really like the very prolific musicians
mm,
in percussion had a 5-octave, and the majority of the repertoire was being written for what was called a 4 1/3, so it would go down to a low A.
mm,
But I think a lot of that evolution, you know, particularly with Keiko Abe and her work with Yamaha developing a 5-octave marimba,
mm.
really changed the demand for it, because you know I mean, I'm sure there's a story about her coming to PASIC that you know, that sort of changed the landscape of like what happened,
Mm.
right? So you know, basically someone shows up to, so PASIC, just for anybody listening, is the Percussive Arts Society International Convention, and it tends to be the central place for any new ideas to kind of
Mm.
come, and often it takes over the industry. Um, so having said that, so this 5-octave marimba, you know, probably got showcased at a concert, and all of a sudden everybody started writing for it. And the same thing goes for a vibraphone. I mean, typically a vibraphone is 3 octaves,
Mm.
but you know, and in Europe they have embraced more of a 4-octave genre
Mm.
in terms of the style of writing and such.
Mm.
But that 4-octave is coming much more prominently in North America now, because
Mm.
you know, Yamaha and Demoro all make a 4-octave vibe, and so it's more available. So all to say, like, you know, this notion of like technique and evolution of the industry and of the instrument itself, you know, all play a role. And in terms of, you know, the techniques that we use and how we evolve with our techniques, like, you know, the students that are coming into the university now are stronger and stronger and stronger every year. And so we have this kind of you know, you had talked about the limitation of composition.
Mm.
The reality is that percussionists are now challenging composers to write more and more difficult stuff,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah, it's absolutely. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And you know, it's interesting because I had my start in percussion on the tabla, and also on the African drums, the ngoma and the djembe.
Hmm.
So you know, it's interesting because recently I had a chance to meet my ngoma teacher, completely by chance at you know, at an event, and we ended up playing together, improvising together. You know, and he said to me, you know, you're involving so much jazz technique in the way you're playing, you know, the ngoma, like, you know, the way you're holding the sticks, the, you know, you're using the goma like to make brush sounds, you know, kind of like playing with brushes or whatever. And I said, you know, actually, this is not new, because I've been studying the history of, you know, of the indigenous musics of Tanzania and East Africa in general. It turns out actually playing with brushes was very common in in East African traditional music. They actually did that all the time when they wanted to play quieter, and you know, you'd have a, you know, a quiet instrument, like let's say the mbira or the kalimba, you know, the thumb piano, for example,
Hmm.
that was
Hmm.
playing. They would actually play with leaves, or they would play with collections of reed, you know, sticks and stuff. So it turns out all this technology that's happened in percussion, it's actually taking its cue from a very long tradition. And so it was funny because he thought it was new, and he thought it was novel, and I was like, no, this already exists in the tradition. I'm actually drawing from a very rich history here, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of interesting because, as you say, you know, the performers challenge the composers and the composers challenge the performers, and I think there's a long history of that in music in general. You know, even when it comes to organists and organ builders, for example, because organists will say, we want this, or we want that, or we want the console to do this, and it's kind of like that relationship, that dialogue, that discourse actually sparks the developments that we see in, and I say this in quotation marks, the music industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I
So
agree. I agree. Well, certainly the implements that percussionists use
hmm,
on their instruments
hmm,
is an ongoing experiment.
hmm,
And so we are, you know, as you know, we get asked to do all the weird sounds in orchestras
yeah,
and in contemporary chamber music, you
yeah.
know. And if it needs to make a weird sound, you know, they just give it to the percussionists. It's always what happens, right?
Yeah,
It's like
we're the clowns of the circus.
100%. It's a, yeah. It's like why, you know, God forbid you ask the violinists to, you know, blow a kazoo or something. It's like, oh, the percussionists, they can handle that.
Yeah.
Right?
I was in a master class. I'm not going to say the name of the person that was teaching it because, they say the better part of valor is discretion. But this teacher, this very well respected and established teacher said, "Oh, playing the gong requires no skill." And I was like, I just banged my head. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
fuck.
yeah,
Like, this is,
yeah.
like, what, like, and
Yeah.
look, here's the thing. When somebody's a quote unquote authority in the field, whatever that, in music, for example, and they're
Yeah.
a revered teacher and they say something like that, it wouldn't piss me off as much if it was, in private, or if it was a joke, or if it was something. But this guy actually meant it. And he
Yeah,
was
right.
talking to a group of the next generation of great artists and leaders and musicians and thinkers.
Yeah,
And this
yeah.
is what he's saying. This is the opinion that he's asserting. So, of course, my response was, well, there are pianists and then there are pianists. And then I said also, in the gong, you have people that play the gong. You have gong, apprentices. You have sort of, the people that are proficient. You have masters. You have grandmasters. And then you have people that completely change and reinvent the idea of what the gong even is. So how can you say that it takes no skill to play the gong? I challenge you to make a gong sound good, with your with whatever limited understanding you have,
Exactly.
Great. And so when people do and say things like that, I mean, it annoys me so much, because percussionists deserve an immense amount of respect. And frankly, percussion rhythm is the most basic and profound and accessible in a way, even though it's incredibly inaccessible. It's a paradox, but like everybody has a heartbeat, for example, so when Orthodox Muslims come up to me and say, oh, music is haram, I'll say, well, do you have a heart? They'll say, yeah, we have a heart. Does it beat? Yeah. Okay. That's rhythm. That's music, end of argument. Like, let's close the doors. Let's all sit down.
Right. I would say to your professor there to challenge him to try the tam-tam part from Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and tell me that a gong is easy to play.
Yeah.
There is definitely more to it than just, banging a gong. It is anyway, in essence,
do you know there's at least 1,000 ways to strike a gong? And I know this.
Right.
I know this because I've played gongs, and I mean the points, the place. There's all these different points. It's like the nervous system of your body, or pressure points. Like each part of the gong, when you play it, has a different sound. But also the way you play it. Like you could glance off. For example, when you're playing a cymbal, you can glance off. You can play it at a different angle. You can use the head of the stick. You can use the shoulder, whatever. With there's different kinds of, as you said, mallets and the implements of actually striking the gong. You can even play the gong by using, for example, a violin bow, which is ironic. Because this professor is a violinist.
yeah. Take his bow and use it.
Yeah, that's right. And be like, yeah, now, why don't you try? Yeah, let's see how much sound you can make. And then we'll talk about what skill it takes to play the gong.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think at the core of this is really a discussion about sound.
Yes.
And
the ontologies of sound. In fact, I asked in this very class, we were supposed to be talking about musical structures and counterpoint or whatever, and I asked a question about sort of the ontological limits of music. And the way that I did that, he said, okay, you're open and you can perform anything you want. And I, kind of like Brian Eno's oblique strategies, I basically said two words. Something actions. I'm forgetting the word that I used, the first word, but I just said two words, and I said, that's my performance. And he got really upset at me. And then this person also went on to say, oh, you're making a statement. It's not a question. I was like, well, then what's a quan? A quan is a statement that's a question. What are you talking about? Anyway, so you can understand. I'm sure you understand that when people are narrow-minded, and especially when it comes to music, that it doesn't help anybody. Because the whole point of music is that it's a giant forum, in sound as well, for exploration and for debate and for discourse. And when people don't see it that way, I think that actually it hurts the whole business of making music, really. And that's what I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one can have an opinion on music, and that's completely fine. We're not going to discredit somebody from having a certain taste of flavor, something that they like.
No, absolutely not.
So, and then there are
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just to further. I mean, there are those of us who dive deeper into what it is. I mean, with Open Ears, we are about transformative experiences. We actually are removing the language itself from the. We aren't a contemporary classical festival, right? It's not about the recital. It's not about having as my wife calls it, bleep blop music to perform on stage, and there is a platform for that. There is a platform for that, but this festival is about experiences,
yes,
in music and in sound,
yes,
and so this is how we try to draw in our audience, because we look for and we encourage novelty and curious ears, curious listening, people who are looking for something that maybe they haven't tried before.
yes,
It happens in food, it happens in art,
yes,
and so we encourage that sort of exploration. And I think that is where we will find a common ground, as opposed to saying you have to do this or you have to do this. What we want to do is create an invitation,
yes,
to try something different.
Yeah, and you see that in the spirituality, in the most profound spiritualities of the world, the spirituality of the first peoples, the Sufis, the greatest Zen Buddhists. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like even the idea of classical music is kind of stupid, because I mean, think about this: the founding father of the modern symphony orchestra, Haydn, he created the ensemble, or he was also the founding father of the string quartet as we currently understand it. He created the music and the ensembles that he wanted to hear. He was not orthodox in any way, shape, or form. Bach. I mean, people think of Bach as the standard. I mean, Bach was the furthest thing from orthodox, and I would go so far as to contend that every single piece of music that he's ever written was literally an improvisation that he just happened to write down. That's why it's so applicable. That's why, a xylophone in the middle of a Japanese forest being played by gravity using a wooden ball sounds just as beautiful in, a Bach piece as, as in my opinion, Yo-Yo Ma playing the 6 Bach cello suites at the proms. And some people might disagree with my viewpoint there, my perspective. And that's perfectly fine. I welcome people to disagree. But the point is, universal music and music in general, doesn't benefit from this sort of arbitrary categorization. It helps to have genres. It does. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I'm saying it helps to have people that know what the quote standards are, or what the, what's what, I guess, because that would be what differentiates perhaps a connoisseur from a layman. But what I'm saying is that even these people who claim to be authorities on what classical music is or what historical performance is, they just aren't. They just aren't, and I apologize because that's going to offend some people, but they just aren't. And the greatest artists understand that. I mean, you look at Yo-Yo Ma, for example. I mean, if you asked him what classical music was, he'd probably laugh.
Right. I mean, I think it really has more to do with academia and musicologists.
Sure, but what is academia? But what is academia? This is a difficult question as well. What is academia? Okay, I'm an academic. But to be an academic, does that mean I have to be part of academia, for example? Absolutely not. So I think academia is a collection of people that claim to know something about something. And so in that sense, I think even the idea of academia is fluid. It's a fluidity. I mean, think about Aristotle, the relationship between Aristotle and Plato, for example. Or, for example, Al-Azhar University, the first university, as we understand it, established in Cairo by the Fatimid caliphs. They welcomed people of all persuasions, religious, political, and, of course, in terms of the knowledge society. The intelligentsia was formed by people that did all kinds of different things, who probably rarely agreed on anything, but together, because of the body of work and because of the relationships that they had, created something profound in terms of an artistic and knowledge society. So in the same way, in quote academia, musical academia, I think you have a flourishing or a renaissance when you have differences that are respected, inherently respected, and seen as a source of strength, right? Rather than as a source of contention or division. So that's why I even the idea of genres. I don't know if you know James B, by the way, the music promoter for Jazz FM 91 in Toronto. He said to me, and this by the way is a person who's promoted jazz for 20 years and is a celebrity in the jazz scene. He said to me, there's no such thing as genres anymore. We live in a genreless world. It's kind of because of the democratization of knowledge and the internet and all that. We live in a kind of free for all. So at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what is your taste. What is it that you want to listen to? So to be pretentious or snobbish and look down at somebody else because they have a different perspective or because they have a different idea of what sound should be or shouldn't be, I think that needs to be dissuaded and disabused from the academic or academia, circles or communities. And so for me, when I go to a masterclass and I hear that kind of stupidity, then it's like, okay, you mess with the bull, you get the horns. That, and I have no patience, no sympathy for people like that. Unfortunately, I wish I did, because it would probably make me make me easier to work with, but
well, I think this is just for ease of learning too. I mean, this is really, it's like, if you're going to teach somebody what a genre of music is, right, it's for comparison and for education. It's like building blocks.
Yes.
It's like learning the alphabet. Yeah, that's it's like right. Exactly it. It's like alphabet, to learn what the word is, to put them into a sentence.
Yes.
To be able to write a speech, to be able to speak.
That's right.
These are just building blocks.
Yes.
Into the greater discourse, the meta narrative of what music is, right?
Indeed.
And so it's just it is simply just a label to categorize in our minds. When we talk about Haydn and Beethoven and whatnot, there's of course subgenres in there, but I'm not going to explain to kindergarten that there are subgenres of classical music, and depending on the era of when they wrote and whether they were from the Vienna school, that kind of discussion has its place, but yes. Not when we're just trying to discuss it in a general sense.
That's right.
So I think there is a time and a place for that categorization, and I agree with you in regards to sort of the genreless trend that is occurring, and I fully see it happening. I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the internet has created this incredible opportunity of this cross-pollination of style and culture, and we're seeing it from all sources of music. I mean, it used to be that classical was influencing pop, and now pop's influencing classical, and you have jazz being influenced by world music and world influenced by jazz. I mean, it's all cross-pollinating for sure.
It is.
I think that's what's beautiful about it.
Absolutely. We live in a global village. But the fascinating thing to me is that the conservatory system has still not caught up with that. I mean, you still have, and this is kind of the old way of thinking, This is the way that I think some teachers have been taught, therefore they teach
traditional
that way.
way.
Yeah.
It's a traditional way.
It's the idea that your student has to sound exactly like you, or that they want carbon copies of themselves as a way to continue the tradition or to continue the legacy. But again, remember I mentioned the Sufi teachings, for example. You have many orders, many sects of Sufism where they'll wear the traditional clothes, they'll wear the hats, they'll take on the titles, they'll change their name. That they do all of that because there's no substance. You see, they say Sufis are secretive. No, there's no secret. There's only the ineffable. And that comes from that depth of understanding, that profundity of knowledge that only comes from experience. And so, if you want to talk about, for example, the chain of succession, some Sufi teachers will say, okay, my teacher was this, was that, and eventually they trace their way all the way back to Ali or Muhammad or whatever in the Muslim tradition. In the classical music world, there's teachers who will say, oh well, I can trace my teacher's lineage back to the Vienna school, to this teacher, or I can trace it all the way back to Beethoven, whatever. Or I studied at Juilliard when I was 9 years old. Like, okay, good for you. You studied at Juilliard at 9 years old. Fine. I mean, that's great. Most musicians or most students will, swoon and be like, oh my God, that's incredible, it's so prestigious, let me kiss your feet now. And it's like, it's like, no, I don't give a shit who you studied with or what school you studied it at, I don't care what conservatory you came from. I care what you do. I care who you collaborate with. I care about the impact of your performance. I care about whether you have that spiritual understanding of what it is you're trying to say, because otherwise it's just rendered moot. If I want to hear a very technically accomplished version of a piece, I'll just have my computer play it. If you're going to practice technique for 10 hours a day for 10 years and then tell me you're an accomplished musician, that's a certain kind of accomplishment. It's not, I don't see that as having any merit whatsoever, because technique is always subservient or in service to expression. And the way I've worked, and I'm not saying that's the way everyone has to work, is I've always put expression first, and I've worked backwards to develop the technique to try to say what it is I wanted to say, and so for me, when you have a teacher that comes in and sort of wants to be very prescriptive and dictatorial in the way that they carry themselves, and you have to respect their authority or their lineage or where they went to school. Now, to me, that just shows a kind of insecurity and a lack of stability in their sense of self, and maybe some musicians, that it works for them to show these things, to have prestige. Oh, I've played at Carnegie Hall and I was only 12 years old. Well, fine, but ask Yo-Yo Ma what his most profound experience is, or whatever, and he's not going to go through his whole resume and tell you, oh, I played this, I played in front of this president, I did that. Who cares? He's probably going to tell you, oh, it's that one moment, where Bobby McFerrin and I were improvising on this particular thing, and this moment happened, and that to me is the kind of, that is a true master's response, and all the other people that claim masterhood or even to be grandmasters of their tradition, but they don't have the goods to back it up, then they'll prop themselves up with their resume. I don't believe in resumes anyway, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I think this actually, deeper than what we're discussing, I think has a lot more to do with privilege. And
yes.
And this is my issue that I have with conservatory. I mean, I grew up in a single mother, very low socioeconomic household. I didn't get access to piano. We had a keyboard, which I noodled on all the time. I wanted to learn, but we literally could not afford piano lessons. So my entry into music school was out of my passion for making music, and not from a standpoint of having this financial backing to allow me to exceed. I mean, same goes for strings. Like, string instruments are expensive. You can't, and yes, there are subsidized programs, 100%. And these subsidized programs came out of the discourse of how privilege creates this separation,
these inequities.
Exactly. And so for people to go to music school in the first place, just that notion in itself,
it's a luxury.
It is very much a luxury. It's very much a luxury. So you have these people that go through, like my experience. I did my undergraduate degree at Laurier, which is a very Western music-driven institution. There's a lot of white instructors, and they're all conservatory trained musicians. And the thing with percussion is that it's a little bit, as you say, we are the clowns. So we didn't grow up playing Bach and all of the cello suites and all of that sort of heritage of conservatory, whether it be piano, strings, or voice. We didn't have that lineage. We don't, I mean, we play Bach on marimba, but we do it out of interest of the music, not out of the
requirement.
Exactly.
That it's the canon.
Yeah, it's like that. Yeah, the matrix of what it takes to become a pianist. You need to play certain things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
and it's funny because as I'm an organist and a pianist as well, and it's funny because I was actually forced to do the Royal Conservatory exams, the ABRSM as they're known, and after grade 3, I told the adjudicator, I said, I said, I refuse to play piano in this way, and I refuse to be judged on my ability to play piano this way. Not because I'm incompetent. I actually got distinctions, but because you are not recognizing the potential that's here. You're actually asking me to be subservient to your idea of what proficiency is or means. And obviously I couldn't have articulated that at the time. I was too young. But I said something along those lines. And so in his comments on my piece, he says, I hope you continue playing music in whatever form it takes. And it's interesting because I gave up the piano for almost 8 years. And the only reason I got back into playing keyboard in the first place is because I saw pipe organ in India. That's a whole nother story, because my organ teacher in India, American guy, product of the conservatory system, he insisted that I, one, be proficient at sight reading, and that I play Bach. And I totally disagreed with that. I said, no, I'm going to improvise at the organ. And I'm not going to improvise in a tradition. I'm going to improvise. That's it. So at one point, he basically cut me off from the organ. He said, you're not allowed to play this instrument. Yeah, I mean, I'm not giving you permission. He actually locked it. There was a lock on the organ. He locked it. Anyway, I figured out where he kept the key. I made a copy of the key and I went in and played whenever I wanted. One day he caught me, because I was playing loudly, and it was the middle of the day, and I was whatever. And as he walks in, starts yelling and screaming, throws a tantrum, loses his shit. And everybody in the chapel is like, why are you doing this? And he's like, this student is not allowed to play the organ. And I'm like, okay, all right, well, Anyway, so it's funny because, I am the product of institutional and systemic subjugation, because I was not willing to comply with the particular idea of what it means to be a musician. How's that
Right.
how's that for being messed up? And so it's even a deeper problem. It's even a deeper problem than saying, oh, percussionists are clowns, or percussionists are incompetent, or percussionists or whatever, all these drummer jokes that are there on the internet. It's like, okay, well, you want to make a drummer joke? Why don't you try playing what Benny Gerb does, and all
Right.
those time signature shifts, and, I don't know, like it seems like these people that make these kinds of comments don't understand the amount of time and work and muscle control that goes into playing the way that we do, and how that tradition or that approach is just as demanding, perhaps more demanding than playing Bach on the piano the way your teacher told you to,
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion. There is the reason why I am as accomplished
Hmm.
as I am has to do with the amount of technique that I learned through university,
Hmm.
and in particular the types of instruments that I gravitated to.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until after I finished my master's degree at the University of Toronto that I started to really hone my skills of expression and hone my skills of musicianship,
Hmm.
and really start to attune my ear to what it was to create my own sound, like what was my sound, and start thinking about what was I going to provide
Can you teach groove?
to the table. Right. Like, yes, I can. I think you can.
Oh yeah.
Yes, because I can tell you people who don't have groove
Who can
can't
fake
do
playing?
that.
Yeah.
Yes, that I have come into my experience of knowing what it's like to explore improvisation
Mhm.
with people who don't understand what it is to groove, and they are percussionists.
Mhm.
So there is the possibility of being able to not have a pocket
Mhm.
while still being accomplished as a musician.
Sure.
And I do think that you can teach how to listen
Mhm. Mhm.
to fit into to be complementary,
Mhm.
because to me groove is about complementing what is occurring,
Yes.
right? And
Well, and being
so
aware of it.
yeah, exactly, that's what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
to listen for this action,
Mm.
for what it is that you're looking for,
Mm.
you
Mm.
know.
Mm. Mm.
And I think you can teach how to listen for that,
Mm.
which is why,
Mm.
in jazz schools, they make you listen
Mm.
to so much music.
Yeah.
We listen to a lot of stuff in classical as well, but there was way less discussion of groove-based learning in
Mm.
classical music,
Mm.
in contemporary music.
Yeah.
And for me as a percussionist, we improvised.
Mm.
We played together in a free form fashion all the time, because our teachers were interested in that activity.
Mm.
So the teachings of Nexus, Russell Hartenberger in particular, and Robin Engelman at University of Toronto were key to my understanding of sound and of finding the groove, of listening for that pocket of how we're playing together. And Dave Campion, who was my undergraduate teacher, was a student of Russell. So there's lineage there from early on as to how we can stay together in this pocket of sound that's inclusive while still being expressive in our own personal way, right? So we're able to contribute something interesting to a flavor that's occurring within whatever the sound is that's happening in the room, but we're finding our key moments to place sounds that sit in this pocket, that sit in this groove. And so I think there is something really rich there. And I will reiterate, I have played with musicians and I've played with percussionists who have not had that lineage, who don't have that, who don't have the experience of improvising and grooving, shall we say. And so there is a struggle. There's a struggle because they don't have the knowledge. It's not that they're not capable of it. It's just that they haven't had the experience of having that quality of sound.
No, you're right. You're right. You know, and it's interesting too, because, you know, there's also this idea that some people have it and some people don't. You know, it's this idea of quote unquote talent, you know, that you can work incredibly hard for years and years and years, and if you don't have talent, then it's in vain. You know, so, you know, we don't go to concerts to listen to people's hard work. We go to listen to talent. We go to listen to their voices. You know, if you have something to say, you don't have the tools with which to say it, that doesn't work. If you have something, you know, if you have the tools but nothing to say, that also doesn't work. So yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question. It's a very difficult question. You know, because I can tell when people fake groove, when people fake the understanding of groove, because you see, I can play without groove and still know where the groove is, right? And I can for you know, I don't know if you know Jerry Granelli, yeah. So he teaches the creative music workshop in Halifax. Now, I would argue that you know, that knowing where something is, you know, allows you to then say whatever it is you want, you know, with a certain gravitas, a certain level of understanding, right? It's like, okay, you know, for example, in pure mathematics, you know, or even quantum physics, there are many charlatans because very few people actually understand pure mathematics or quantum physics, you know. And sometimes you have people that are so profound and so ahead of their times. The perfect example is Srinivas Ramanujan. Most brilliant, in my opinion, the most brilliant mathematician to ever live. You know, I mean, what he was doing and what he was saying was so difficult and so obtuse and ahead of its time. Most people thought that he was a raving lunatic. They didn't understand what he was on about. And then finally, you know, he sent his work in a bunch of papers, infamous letters now, to a professor at Cambridge. And the professor at Cambridge opened the note, you know, said, you know, what joker sent this today? You know, because people are always sending letters. Oh, you know, I know this, I know that, I know how to prove this, blah, 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 blah. He looked at it, he looked at the paper and he says, you know, this must be true because nobody would have had the imagination to invent it if it wasn't. And as it turns out, most of what Ramanujan did, it took hundreds of years to prove it, or at least 150 to prove it. But today, our entire, for example, stock market, financial exchange, gambling, quantum physics, black holes, all of his theorems were correct. So in terms of relevance, his work was the equivalent to the Principia Mathematica, you know, which would have been, you know, in terms of the macroscopic world, or, you know, physics, in Newtonian physics anyway, the most important work, you know, in that realm. So to me, being aware, and I'm bringing all of this analogy back to music so that we can sort of discuss it in musical terms or acoustic terms. It's like playing in a space and understanding the acoustic, or if you're playing outside, the understanding the lack of acoustic. So if you don't understand the space and you cannot play in a way that is taking into account the space that you're in, you can tell, like for example, somebody that decides to play a heavily distorted guitar inside a cathedral, there's tasteful ways to do it. There's interesting and fascinating and artistically profound ways of doing that. And then there's also ways of playing that totally disregard the fact that you're in the acoustic that you're in. And so it's the same thing with groove. I'm not saying you have to be able to groove to be a great musician, but you have to be aware of it. At the very least, you have to be aware of it. Because if you're not aware of it, then it's like if I suddenly took out the context and instead of living in a tapestry, which, the musical world is, you suddenly had an ahistorical vacuum. So for me, understanding time, or at least the passage of time as a percussionist, is the most important thing, because that's what music is. It's the arrangement of sound and silence across space and time. If you don't understand time, even though time is an illusion, what's the point? How can you call yourself a competent musician? I don't know. To me, these are kinds of questions I ask, and I'm not sort of discouraging people from playing, but I'm saying, as somebody who knows, as somebody who is a connoisseur, and I listen to somebody who has no awareness, then I don't want to listen. I would walk out of the concert. Even if I paid for the concert, I'd walk out of the concert in the middle of it, or just as soon as it starts, because I don't want to subject myself to that. And maybe that's an arrogant viewpoint, but it's like, why would you eat food that you don't like the taste of? For example, you can say, okay, give it a chance. Let's keep eating. It'll grow on you. Yeah, fine. But if you had somebody that burnt the eggs, do you really want to eat burnt eggs and then eventually acquire a taste for burnt eggs? I mean, if that's what you want to do, go do you. I'm not stopping you. I'm a live and let live kind of guy. But don't ask me to do that. Don't force me to play with your toys or your ideas in that way. And that's my contention. That's the bone I have to pick with the conservatory system. That's the bone I have to pick with these so-called teachers.
Well, I can say that there is an evolution occurring, and this includes teachers who have been in prominent positions for a long period of time. Particularly, I mean, I can only speak from the experience of percussion, but I can tell you that there are teachers who are no longer interested in teaching how to win an orchestra position, right? I mean, that they're interested in creating musicians. Yes. And so, even the way that orchestras are hiring percussionists now, they include new repertoire that is improvisatory in nature, that is more contemporary, that is far more difficult in terms of what the repertoire is in percussion, because there is a new demand on the level of what percussionist is. And even furthermore, they include Bernstein's bongo part for West Side Story Suite because it is not written out, and it sounds horribly angular and not groovy if you play what's on the page. And since conservatory training teaches you to play what's on the page, this is a great example of getting
away from the literality.
The ability. Get to extract the ability of a percussionist to be able to play in time with interest, following the flavor or cultural representation of what's happening, whilst still being able to count and stay in with the music, knowing that you have to go back to the page once the bongo section is done. So you have to know what a mambo is. You have to understand where the tumbao pattern is, because that's what Bernstein wanted, but didn't want to write it out in a fashion because orchestra musicians at that time didn't have that understanding of it. So this is like an opportunity.
I mean, for example, if you play flamenco and you don't know the compass or you don't know the count, I mean, you would come across as, you know, incredibly shallow. And any flamenco musician worth their salt, you know, would if you dared to call yourself a flamenco musician, would would look at you and laugh.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because, you know, I consider myself a musician. I don't put a label on it. But if somebody said to me, you know, you're not a classical musician, or you're not a jazz musician, or you're not a whatever kind of musician, then I could take them to task and say, well, actually, no, I am a jazz musician. I'm steeped in the tradition. I do exactly what jazz musicians are supposed to do, right? And I can be an ambassador for that tradition in a completely authentic way. There's no cultural appropriation there. There's no, you know, you cannot tell me I am an inauthentic jazz musician. And you cannot claim to know what jazz is, because the nature of jazz is that it's a giant question. You know, it's about liberation. It's about freedom. It's about asking difficult questions, right? It's about a tradition of people that came from subjugation, and this was one of the few ways that they could express themselves. So to me, somebody coming to me, I had this happen, you know, and it happens that this person was white and an established professor at a university, say to me, oh, you know, don't call what you play jazz or even free jazz, you know, because it's not, you know, what you're playing is not jazz, you know, it's something else, you know, it's free music, or you call it something else. But no, I can only play the way that I play because I understand the jazz philosophy and the jazz way of playing. You know, I mean, if I'd never listened to Art Tatum or Oscar Peterson, or, you know, or sat at the feet, metaphorically, of these great masters of the tradition, I would never be able to play or even understand what I understand. So for somebody to come and tell me that you're not a jazz musician, that pisses me off. But I would never go out and say, oh, well, I'm a jazz musician. I just say I'm a musician. I can say I play jazz. That's also different. You see? So to me, there's all these nuances and subtleties that are most of the time lost in translation, especially when a musician or an institution is divorced from the actual culture that it claims to represent or teach. Even, like, I mean, there's a whole series of institutions that make money teaching jazz. I mean, you can't teach jazz. You know, you said I can teach someone how to groove. No, you can teach them the precepts, the tenets, the essence of groove, but then it's up to them to understand that and to embody it. So in that sense, the teacher is only a guide. The teacher can only show you the way. Then it's up to you to walk that path. That's something that's inherently obvious to anybody that is doing anything of value in any profession, whether they're an architect, a doctor, or a musician. So in that sense, I think it's a universal idea that you can be shown the way, but at the end of the day, you have to walk it. You know, so I can say to somebody, this is what groove is supposed to sound like, but, you know, again, it's this issue between subject and object. You know, I can never become the object, because if I claim that this is groove, I'm actually doing a disservice to groove. You know, and to me, that respect for that relationship, you know, like when you bow your head, what are you bowing your head to? You're bowing your head to everything that sound is or can be, or you know, I don't claim to know the answers, you know, when I have these kinds of conversations, but I do know how to ask questions, you know, and to me, the best teachers do that. They ask you critical, open-ended questions. Then you, however you choose to answer or not answer, that is what makes you the musician that you are or can be, or you know, or have the potential to become. And that to me is what the greatest teachers do. And that's why a lot of times, you know, to find a great teacher.
I have a difficult question for you.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm ready.
On this like rant right now, and I find it fascinating and somewhat ironic that you're discussing how much you don't want to be classified as a specific genre, while at the same time that you're angry that people will disregard you when you want to be a jazz musician and they say you're not a jazz musician, right?
Yes, I can see the irony. I'm very, very well aware of the irony. Go on. What's the question?
Well, my question is do you want to not be labeled, or do you want to be labeled? Because you shouldn't be angry.
Both and neither.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's okay to be both, for sure. But I think that if you're going to step up on a soapbox and rant about what it is that you're ranting about, I think it's important that you stand, like, pick a lane. What
No.
you like, why does it affect you so much? Why is it so important that you be defined as a jazz musician when you aren't worried about
to have the
musician?
freedom? You missed the point. It's to have the freedom to be defined as such, to have the freedom to claim that. That's what I'm talking about, and not to make that claim in a shallow way or in a kind of superficial way. I mean, to have the freedom to make that claim, to articulate that. It's like freedom of speech. What does that mean? It's like asking, because after all, what is freedom? You can only be free from something if there are limits, right? I mean,
just go broader with it. This is what I'm saying, is like, like the teacher was trying to say, don't call this jazz, say that you're just playing free form improvisation, which is fine. The problem is that you want to be a jazz musician, and so you want to be labeled, and you're not getting that label.
No. Actually, that's not the issue at all. No, actually, I think you misunderstood me. Okay, this is very interesting, because this is gonna take some articulation, but I think I'm up for the challenge. No, so my issue is not what you call or don't call my music, whether you classify me as a jazz musician or a classical musician, as an Indian musician or an African musician. I am claiming to be a plurality. I'm claiming to be all of those things and none of those things. And I know that that's difficult, very difficult, but that is my claim. That is my stake. And that's what I'm standing on the soapbox about. That is my claim.
Which is okay, but you can't be upset when a teacher, what I'm saying is that there are teachers who have a matrix of what it means to create a genre, create the category of what the music is. And if you are not fitting into that category,
according to them,
that shouldn't be your anger towards being not defined in what their category is.
I wouldn't say I'm angry. I would say I'm passionate. That for me, this is a critical
sorry, you
discourse.
used the term pissed off. You said, I'm pissed off when somebody says that I'm not a jazz musician.
Yes, that's right.
And so
I would say I would qualify that as annoyed, not angry, annoyed. I'm annoyed by it because it's like a nuisance, like a fly. You're not angry at the fly. The fly's the fly. The fly's going to annoy you. That's what it does. But it's a nuisance, And
yeah.
And you.
But that's what my point is that that can't anger you if you're a plurality and you know that you are both neither a jazz musician and a jazz musician. Then it shouldn't affect you and it shouldn't annoy you that when somebody says, "Well, you're not a jazz musician," because you identify.
Actually, you're right. I agree with you.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. There's not a, you know that you're not, but you also are.
Yeah.
So if we want to go into this quantum world of like definitions of having two streams of thought simultaneously happening, then absolutely there's room.
If they open Schrodinger's box and the cat is dead or alive, yeah.
That's exactly it. You neither are or you are.
I love that.
That's fun.
I love that. Well, thank you for saying that. I love how you framed that. That's a wonderful way of thinking about it, and I agree with you actually. Thank you for holding me accountable there. I appreciate that. Yeah. So anyway, this was supposed to be an interview about you, and I ended up on a rant.
It's good though. We navigated our way through some stuff. It's good.
Yeah. We went down that river. There was a lot of rapids, but we made it. We survived. Whew.
That's right.
Yeah. I think you shared on your Facebook page this amazing project. Some guy who created I think it's a marimba or a vibraphone that can be played by mallets that you can trigger from a keyboard. I think so. I think you mentioned some, or you did some, or maybe it's triggered by a computer. Some sort of technology for playing the percussion instrument in a different way. And I know that, for example, on the theater organ, that's possible. You have vibraphones and xylophones and all kinds of other percussion on a theater organ, including gongs, actually,
Yeah.
on the very largest ones. So I guess, is it still a percussion instrument if you're using, if the physicality of playing it in the traditional way that we understand percussion, is it still an authentic way to play the instrument in your perspective, right? Like, yeah, and I know that that's a bit of a leading question, but I'm curious what you would think about that. Extraneous ways of playing an instrument, extended techniques, playing a timpani with a ebow, playing a vibraphone with a cello bow. I mean, that's been done so many times; it's almost a cliche now.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what your question is now. Yeah, for sure. So percussion, the term, the word, let's put some things into context.
Yes.
The word percussion is the striking of an instrument to create sound. But we have evolved as a sector of the traditional frame, of that word percussion, to include, the implements that we use to create sound. I think, and this is my own personal take, and a lot of people I think fall into this, especially percussionists, are that we are more experimenters of sound, but we still fall under the genre, the category of percussionist.
the broad category, and it's interesting because I would claim that everything is percussion. Like, and you can, I'm sure you
well, you could create, absolutely,
because like even on like, for example, on a tracker organ, I can play tabla rhythms on the tracker organ, by actually playing the way I would play a tabla but on the organ. And I've done that, and actually it's quite a nice way of playing it, if you ask me. And then like, obviously the piano is very obviously a percussion instrument, but even a violin is a percussion instrument, and a flute is a percussion instrument, because what's happening is the wind, the breath is striking that surface. So in a sense, the idea of percussiveness, or to strike, it's to excite a certain, the production of sound method. I would say that everything is percussion, and remember we discussed this, that rhythm is the most basic form of music. I think if I extend that metaphor really, really, really far, I would say that, for example, even 433, John Cage's piece, is in a way an opus for percussion, because you're listening to the sound of people's breaths, of people's hearts beating, of perhaps if you're in a certain kind of concert hall, the ventilation system, or the rain sounding on the roof, for example. So in a way, 433 is actually, in my opinion, not just a great example or a great demonstration of polyphony and percussiveness and musicality, but it's not about the silence. It's actually a giant listening experiment. And what makes a percussionist, right? It's not their ability to strike something per se, although of course that matters, because technique is technique. But I mean, I think it's actually their ability to listen and imagine what a sound should be, right? Because I can make anything a percussion instrument, and so could you probably. A spoon, a pots and pans, a table, and that's how people even recognized that I had any kind of musical abilities, because I used to play on my mom's pots and pans. I used to play on their shoulders while they were feeding me. That's why I got my first instrument, which was the tabla, right? So
yeah, well, this is why I was saying that we are explorers of sound.
Sonic explorers. I love that.
And
I love that.
And so it's different. It's a little bit different than from a percussionist standpoint, because there are percussionists who solely strike with their hands or solely strike with their sticks.
Yes.
I feel like my genre, for sure, and the way, my style, my voice, my lineage of who I've studied with, is far more. Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, it is really more about exploration of sound that happens to the majority of our sound creation is
Mm.
through the striking
Mm.
of instruments.
Mm. Mm.
But you know, we're only limited by the instrument that we play.
But
And this
what
is
does striking mean? That's another
right. No,
interesting question.
right. I mean, absolutely, like we can
Yeah.
define percussion as the stick moves up, the stick comes down, and a sound is produced.
Yes.
We can also scrape, we can shake, you know,
Yeah.
it's some type of friction
Yeah.
between two objects.
Yes. Yes.
And
Or
you
to
know,
go even further, it's an interaction between
right, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, when we involve all of these implements, and you know, we joke about, you know, the fact that we have to play the kazoo or whatever, the champagne corks at the back of the orchestra, or you know, in Torque we're in, you know, if we're
Or
using
cannons in Tchaikovsky's
yeah,
case.
exactly, right, yeah, exactly. You know, and now as we evolve, electronics have become a huge
Oh yes.
influence within percussion, and how we are
Yes.
using that to manipulate our sounds in an interesting way. I mean, that's
Totally.
really what it is. We are just exploring sound all the time,
Absolutely.
and we're
Yeah.
constantly challenging
Yeah.
ourselves
Like
to
the
find
world's
new sounds.
there's all kinds of videos of the world's greatest keyboard drummer, and then have a drummer who does insane things on a keyboard like the one behind me, and
Yep, yep.
and they're playing the drums. Then you'll have the Ableton, what are they called, the Launchpad, or and then you'll have people that play drums on you know all kinds of different implements, and different technologies and different ways of thinking. Or even, for example, when Brian Eno programs drums, on Pro Tools, you're listening to that, and you're like, holy crap! Like the fact that he could produce that kind of rhythm, he could never play it physically. I mean, he calls himself
Right.
a non-musician, but the fact that he has the imagination to come up with that rhythm, to me, that really shows me that on one hand, percussion is totally inaccessible, and yet at the same time completely accessible. It's the most, in a way, it's the most democratic and the most sort of open-ended musical construct that exists.
Right.
Like, for example, touching the skin of a drum would create a sound, or gently touching a cymbal that has sizzles built into it would be a way of striking the whatever. So it's what you're saying is exactly right. Not only are we just sonic explorers, but I would say we're exploring the methodologies of interaction with matter, and with surfaces, because, and I say surface in the loosest sense of the word here, because like you're well aware there's drummers that play the sides of their toms, the wooden parts. There's people that sort of have all kinds of different implements that they use that are extraneous to to what we would traditionally understand as a drum kit. I mean, look at Neil Peart, for example. Like, or playing, for example, the Roland sampling pad, or the octopad or whatever. I mean, are those really percussion instruments? Well, of course they are, because you strike them. But at the same time, it's like a giant system of triggers, that are being activated.
Right.
So it's interesting. And like you said, there's this massive movement of electronics in drumming and hybrid drum kits. People that people that cue, for example, a speech of Stockhausen, a sample of Ethiopian music and chanting, and then have a Mickey Mouse tune in the background, and then start doing something on and to me, that not only is that fascinating because it's forcing us to re-examine what we think of as a percussionist, but like the Torque, that group, that ensemble, to me, that's a beautiful way of putting a giant question mark on what is percussion and what is the percussionist. And I love the work that you guys have done, with Dinuk Wijeratna, for example. Like that's really cool stuff. Because it's obviously written out, but at the same time, it just feels like it was an accident that you walked on stage and you happened to have percussion instruments there and something happened.
Well, absolutely. And the reality is that the way Torque plays sheet music is different from the way another ensemble interprets it. This is about interpretation.
Yes.
And so Torque has its own synergy.
Yes.
And
relationship. Yes.
And relationship that we can't imbue on anybody. We can't teach that to somebody else. What the synchronicity that we have. It comes with time,
yes,
and our individual personality that all come together
Mm.
and our personalities come out in the way that we approach each of the instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you're mixing a cocktail, everybody puts a little bit of something different to sort of, everybody's going to make a,
Yes.
we're going to make a martini, but everybody has. And so what happens is we have 4 martinis brought together every time we play, and that creates this, floral experience, this taste that's unique, and
Yes.
and and will only happen when the 4 of us play
That's
that
right.
together. And so with Dinook's music, he has his one of our favorite pieces in our repertoire right now is Resilia, which is it's the cadential movement of his larger work Invisible Cities.
Hmm.
So he used South Indian
Conical.
rhythms
Yeah.
to write Ursilia on Western,
Mhm.
and we use bongos so we have 2 bongos and 3 tom-toms.
Mm.
So we have 5 instruments, and so we play it in a traditional Western style, but we bring our approach
Hmm.
to that tune. So even our interpretation of Ursilia will be different than another quartet's interpretation. There's in fact there's a recording of another ensemble based in Texas
Hmm.
online that you can see, and then there's our version of it online. And we're actually about to do the orchestral premiere of it.
Hmm.
We've changed. So Dinook has done an orchestration of the entire Invisible Cities for orchestra now.
Hmm.
And so we will be premiering that in January of 2022 with the Niagara Symphony, which we were very, very excited about. This piece has had an incredible evolution from 2014, when we first premiered it with the University of Saskatchewan's wind ensemble,
Hmm.
to playing it with the majority of wind ensembles across Canada, and now, and Ursilia, we've taken on as a solo piece that we play within our program, and now is going to take it to the orchestral stage. This has got some legs,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
really, really, really great.
Yeah. It's like a fine wine. It's really evolved in the bottle. And
Yep,
then
absolutely.
when you finally decant it and actually taste it, you're
Yeah.
tasting history.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, for sure.
No, that's
It's going to
amazing.
evolve even further when
Yeah.
we start to play it with
Well,
orchestras.
the best music does.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the thing that the best music
Yeah.
does. It stands
Yeah.
the test of time, and if it's universal, then it's not limited by its context. Yeah, yeah, no, totally. And it's interesting because, when people go to hear an orchestra, a symphony orchestra, it's interesting because they're also going just as much to hear the relationships between the musicians and between the conductor and between that. When we listen to music, we're not just listening to sound. I mean, the sound is
Right.
representative of something, of concepts, of relationships, of histories, of ontologies, of epistemologies. You can go really, really far into that rabbit hole.
Lots of ologies.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's interesting that you say you're playing on Western instruments because, even our idea of what a drum is, I think it comes directly from Africa, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, even the drum kit as we currently understand it is kind of a result of pluralism. I mean, cymbals and gongs are sort of a part of a particular tradition, whether it's the Turkish tradition,
Yeah.
as is the case with Zildjian or Sabian, or in some cases it's Chinese or Mongolian. We
Yeah.
have all kinds of pluralism coming together. And then the snare drum, for example, I've seen very primitive examples of snare drums, and it's interesting because obviously the idea of having snares on the drum is ancient, and it doesn't come from an quote unquote Western classical music or even
No,
Western
for sure.
or even so.
Yeah.
It's interesting because
Yeah.
the evolution of instruments as well over time, when you sort of want to think about where they've come from. This is why I like to think that all music is actually a humanistic cultural legacy, and that the people that bear the weight of it, of holding that space. They're actually the bearers of that wisdom, but it doesn't really belong to anybody. It's our collective sort of, it's our collective legacy, it's a collective treasure. And I like to think of us, and I say us loosely, the musical community, who are looked upon by the younger generation. We're sort of the stewards of our respective musical wisdoms and perspectives that we carry and that we've developed. So it's like the First Nations people look at Canada, look at the land not as belonging to them, but they belong to the land. They're stewards of the land. The relationship is totally different. And so when Juilliard asks you to pay $50,000 to go there to study, even if I got a scholarship to go study at Juilliard, I probably wouldn't. And I was invited to audition at Juilliard by a member of one of the departments I was interested in studying at. And I took it under consideration because it had been a dream of mine to go to Juilliard when I was maybe 13, 14, 15. But I don't think I could do that. I don't think that, one, I don't think it would serve me in the most intellectual and artistic sense, but also it wouldn't serve other musicians and the legacy of what music can be, because I think that, like you said, it's a matter of inequity, it's a matter of access, it's a matter of privilege. And while I do come from an immense amount of privilege, which I'm always trying to hold myself accountable for, and other people can hold me accountable for whatever privilege I have, for presenting as male, for example. That's one of the privileges I have. But I think that whole legacy of what Juilliard is, or what it could become, is fascinating, because that's where I see my kind of responsibility, my civic responsibility, to try to shape these different institutions into what they can be and into what they should be, not just in my opinion or in my perspective, but in the perspective of many people who have seen the histories, who are aware of the legacy, the wisdoms, the heritages, the way that music is and it has evolved. I paid my guru, my Indian guru, for teaching me to play the tabla, for example. So it's not that I think musicians shouldn't be paid, quite the opposite. But I think music shouldn't be institutionalized. To me, that actually that takes away from the profundity of what it is or can be. I think conservatories and facilities are basically a collection of physical and human resources that can be mobilized to impart the potential of what music can be to the next generation, and to see institutions stewarded that way and managed that way, and for the leadership positions, the true leadership positions at these schools. I'm not just talking about the dean and the faculty. I'm talking about, for example, the board or even the patrons, for the collective as a whole to sort of look at itself and re-examine what it is. I mean, to me, that can only happen from, from being an insider's outsider, which is exactly what I am. And I feel that about you too, by the way. That you're an insider's outsider. You've had, through your own experience, the benefit of a conservatory training. You got to hone your technique. And in a sense, you're a product of that. Like, I'm a product of the IB, for example, the International Baccalaureate. The idea of questioning everything, of questioning the system. Funnily enough, it came from the world's best educational system, the best one we have to date. And so it's funny because, ironically, we are all the products of even the most ineffective and inelegant and inequitable situations. And so as a result of our privilege, we can then go back and check it, which is kind of what you did when I was on that rant. You held me accountable.
For sure. I will say, as anti-establishment as I am, and in some cases I have my own criticisms of an institution. The reality is that I wouldn't be where I was, without I am them. Now, without the institution. So absolutely. for us to make a blanket statement,
I'm not trying to tear the walls down. I'm just trying to open the doors.
right.
open the windows.
Fair. I just mean, I think I maybe I misinterpreted. I may have misread what you were saying, but it sounded to me like you said we shouldn't have music in institutions, and I think that
No,
that's
I said
actually
music should not be institutionalized.
right.
Slightly
So,
different.
okay,
Yeah.
fair, but at the same time, we can't dismiss the fact that there's been many benefits from having music
Oh, sure.
taught
Yeah.
in this
Sure.
case. And I'm not trying to say that this is the only way to do it, because there are
Mhm.
many musicians out there who have done who had incredible careers and are incredible musicians without going through the conservatory training.
Sure. Sure.
And in particular, there's a lot of genres are
Mm.
not, we just happen to fall, our circle that we are in is part of the academic, for lack of a better description. The circles of who we discuss, who we talk to, all of my colleagues went to university for music.
Not mine.
I don't, but you still went to, the reason why I know who you are is because you went to LAMP, which is still an institution of music.
Sure.
Right. So, and the reason
is that how you know me? Yeah, that is how you
Yes.
know me.
and Danuk, who is a doctor of music,
Yes.
who I know is connected with you, like that, the circles are institutional.
Yes.
Regardless of the fact that you want to be anti-institution,
Yeah.
it is
Well,
still
no, I'm not
circle.
anti-institution. I'm asking institutions to evolve.
Which they are.
Which they are. Yes, not fast enough though. Just like scientific progress. I was at an Oxford lecture about the history of physics, and I asked a very interesting question. I said, "Is there such a thing as the scientific method?" And of course, I love the answer. It was so beautiful. That no, there is no such thing as the scientific method, right? Because in a way, science is not its method, nor is it limited or dictated by what is currently understood. I think institutions and music are the same way, and that's why, while when you go to school, you're taught the scientific method of formulating a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, using evidence by doing lab tests. Yes, you're taught all of that. I'm the beneficiary of learning Western musical notation. I don't limit myself to it, but my God, I mean, if I couldn't read music, there's so many things I wouldn't have had access to, right? No, I don't claim that I learned music through reading, because I certainly didn't, but I am the beneficiary of being literate, right? In that particular way, in that particular format. And yeah, you're right. You know me through LAMP, you know me through Dinuk, and this is my relationship with every institution that I've ever been in has been thorny at best. And in particular, the institution you know me from, I cannot say that on one hand I was the beneficiary of the generosity of certain people, but I was also the victim of again being constricted immensely by the way that I was expected to carry myself and the way I was expected to be, and for example, respecting the quote unquote authority of certain people or certain, certain rigors of establishment that make one less than or more than, dependent on how big of a career one has or whether one is a doctor of music or not. Now, and I don't disrespect doctorates, and I don't disrespect honorary doctorates or people that have done great things, but I'm also aware, for example, and this is a systemic problem as well, and again about inequity and about how institutions can corrupt themselves. They become dinosaurs, and they become cancerous almost. Today, if I decide to make a $500,000 contribution to Oxford, I guarantee you 6 months, 6 months, 1 year down the line, you get an honorary doctorate. You can basically buy those things. It's like in the Vatican, you could become a cardinal by buying your way in. Why do you think the Medici family produced 2 popes? Right? Now, I'm not poo-pooing institutions in general. What I'm saying is that they need to be held accountable, and that the standards for those that accountability, I say accountability in quotation marks, because again, accountability can become like a witch hunt, and you can have privilege reversed on people. Like, for example, quote unquote feminists attacking, people and using whatever. There are times where these things are bastardized, to pardon my French. They're bastardized. But what I'm saying is, in general, the direction of society, the direction of the intelligentsia, the direction of any society that you care to engage with, it only can grow and move forward when you have people that are willing to have some skin in the game and do difficult things, ask difficult things, be contentious in some way, shape, or form. And of course, I don't know if you know Cameron Carpenter. I mean, he staked his claim on building an instrument, spent approximately $2 million, maybe more, on the development of this instrument that is a quote unquote pipe organ, but really it's a digital instrument which contains samples of 30 different organs that he claims are artistically superior, which he has then shaped into his instrument. I mean, that is an example of an artist staking a massive claim, and well, he had the talent and the strength to back up that claim. But a lesser artist, a lesser person, would have failed in that conquest, in that particular endeavor. So while I respect everything that institutions and institutional opportunities have brought to me, including having this conversation or being part of these circles with people like yourself and Dinuk and all the rest of it, many of my circles and many of my contacts are not part of the academia and part of institutions, because I don't look at the intelligentsia as being a sum of academia. I don't. I never have. I learn just as much from the guy that sweeps my floor as I do from a university professor. Different things, different subjects, different contexts. But I can back that claim up. I can learn just as much about how to carry myself from somebody like that as I can from a university professor. And I know that the human condition, because of the nature of it, is built on an inequity, on the fact that everything is not egalitarian. People have different intellectual capacities, they have different financial capacities. If you're talking to a billionaire, they have problems just like you and I have problems, but they have very different problems. Their capacity, their whatever, the way that they think is different, right? Now, I'm not saying one is less than or more than, but I'm just saying there are inherent differences in the human condition. So it's not egalitarian. But what I'm saying is, I don't believe that the intelligentsia is because of an institution, and I can back up that claim, because in history, the way that knowledge, the succession of knowledge, the purpose of life itself is to pass down knowledge. Even if you look in the plant kingdom, in the animal kingdom, why have cactuses evolved to survive in the desert? Because they pass down the knowledge of what it takes to survive in the desert. That seed, the cactus seed that's contained in the fruit, is the beneficiary of all that history of all cactuses that have come before it. That cactus may die, but it has a fighting chance because of all that history, whatever you want to call it. And it's just, the funny thing is, with institutions, we also have to remember memory. Memory is a very fragile and temperamental thing. We don't remember that institutions have actually been the cause, governments, institutions, and just people who claim to be institutions, doing all kinds of things that have hurt the development of great potential, great talent in the music world, and on the global stage have caused horrible things to happen. The Rwandan genocide. The Catholic Church, is, for example, responsible for many issues in Africa. The Christian pogroms, for example, and for example, in today, the Muslims who claim to to have jihad because they, the Quran claims to allow violence in certain limited contexts. What I'm saying is, I am grateful for everything and everyone that has come before that I am the beneficiary of, and I include in that institutions like Juilliard and Lamp, because by God am I a beneficiary of that, and I would be stupid to claim otherwise. But just because I'm a beneficiary does not mean that I cannot see the inelegance and the ineffectiveness and the methodologies of resistance that had to be employed by myself in order to, one, survive, and two, matter in those kinds of spaces. And to me, that struggle is actually what gives meaning to anything that I'm saying, including whatever career I have at the moment. which is of course quite limited. I'm just starting out, obviously, but yeah, the opportunities that I've had, for example, to record at Roy Thompson Hall, to play at the Four Seasons Center in Toronto, or the Aga Khan Museum, my working relationship with the Aga Khan Museum. I would not have had those things if I hadn't had the privilege of going to the best schools and traveling around the world and learning with different teachers. But all of that privilege aside, if I hadn't wanted it and I hadn't fought for it and I hadn't struggled for it, I would have been subsumed by those institutions. It takes a very strong person to actually go through all of that, come out on the other side, and still retain any kind of integrity and idea of who you are. So that's my perspective, and that's where I'm coming from.
All right. Well, I have to go. So I wonder if there's an if we can summarize this up with either a last question or whatnot.
Yes. Well, thank you for being so patient and listening. It's No, it's interesting because what you said about knowing me through LAMP and knowing me through the Nook. I think I want to. My last question is about that. It's, would you have accepted this? Would you have come on this interview, or would you have engaged with me if for example I had no provenance, I had not come from anywhere, you didn't know me from anywhere, and you had no idea of, for example, my ability in music, or inability for that matter? Would you have taken me seriously, or would you have accepted this engagement, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, always. I mean, I'm an educator. I have a master's in music education. I work with a plethora of abilities and intellectuals, and there's never an opportunity that I would dismiss or feel that I was beyond or above to not just discuss my own passions and how I feel like we can engage the world in a more genuine and meaningful way. That's not in my personality to dismiss someone's abilities. You could have been someone in kindergarten who wanted to bring me in as a show and tell, and I'm happy to come and talk about things. Thank you for asking me to be a part of it.
That's so beautifully put, and so I think I consider you a brother now. Because that's a beautiful that's so beautiful, and I think the greatest personalities and teachers are like that. They make, even though they're at a very high level, they make themselves accessible. They live with everybody. That's you said it so beautifully, and thank you for. Yeah, thank you for sharing your perspective, for holding me accountable, and for patiently listening while I while I went on this rant. I wasn't expecting to go on this rant, but it just, I don't know, it happened. It was the moment.
Yeah.
Our oratorio for two voices.
That's right. Very cool, man.
Well, thank you so much.
No worries. All the best. Take care.
Bye.